My next guest is a registered social worker and holistic naturopathic therapist. She holds a science degree in psychology and biology from Acadia University in Nova Scotia, a social work degree from Memorial University, a master's in holistic nutrition from the Edison Institute of Nutrition in Ontario. She is a Shanker certified self-reg practitioner, and I'd love to find out what that's all about. She works with individuals, families, and groups to design and deliver a wellness counseling service to optimize mental and physical health. Laurie has a diverse background in clinical social work, advanced holistic nutrition, self-reg, and physical fitness. Her hybrid of experience is very unique, with a background that includes over 20 years counseling and social work experience with a master's degree in social nutrition. She is well equipped to educate and shift perspectives. She owns and operates 2 holistic health services, Laurie Pinhorn Holistic Counseling Services and Feeding Futures Family Interventions. The main focuses of these services are helping people live better with anxiety, ADD, ADHD, autism, and OCD. Treatment approaches are self-reg and cognitive behavioral therapy based. Welcome, Laurie Pinhorn.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here.
I can't tell you how many people contacted me and said you have to have Laurie Pinhorn on the show.
That is so cool. Thank you.
It is really cool. So today we're going to talk about holistic mental health management, the healthy brain and body connection, the science behind. Give our listeners some idea as to what they can expect to hear from you today.
Well, my intention and my hope is to help shift perspectives. That historically in the mental health world, and I do see that a shift is happening, but historically in the mental health world, we've gone to therapists and to medical doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and we've really been interested in what's going on above the neck, what's going on in the head, the medical aspect of what's going on in the brain to treat a mental health concern, or also the cognitive scripts that we're trying to shift, like using cognitive behavioral therapy or different types of behavioral therapy. And we've lost the ancient wisdom, I think, that there's a body connected to the brain, and there's all kinds of systems in the body that are operating below the brain that are searching for balance, and they're searching for homeostasis. And when those systems in the body are off balance, what we see is off balance between our ears. So the nervous system, for example, we have to use procedures, interventions, therapies that calm parts of the anxious nervous system so that we don't have so much racing thoughts and impulsive behaviors and things like that. So my biggest intention and hope is that we shift perspectives to start talking about the whole body and how treating the whole body can help impact what's going on for our mental health concern. So
let's get into this, and because I'm sure our listeners loved to hear about alternatives, love to hear about, and I always say to people, you don't have to put all your eggs into one basket. Just because someone says something doesn't mean that that's the right approach. Nobody knows everything. A person only knows what they know. Yeah. They don't know what they don't know. So how is a holistic counseling process different than traditional counseling? So I guess you're talking about talk therapy.
I am, yes. And, I've come from the talk therapy world. I was a social worker for over 20 years in a very progressive community-based mental health agency. And I was trained myself and went away on training, and just recently, last couple of years, did some training with cognitive behavioral therapy. And I've been invited to train people in that process. And I used that therapy for a very long time. And I always was sort of left scratching my head about, well, if somebody's coming into my office and they're really hungry, or say they haven't slept, or they're just gaming all day or something like that, doing something that's super stimulating, the cognitive behavioral therapy was just not being successful. And the literature and the research would say that cognitive behavioral therapy is one of those therapies that always rise to the surface, statistically significant.
Absolutely.
We got to try to use the cognitive behavioral therapy. But I was always interested in the statistic of the person who the CBT wasn't working for. And I researched all of that. And it's about emotional regulation. It's about physical regulation. It's about when our brain is hardwired to live in the limbic center of our brain where our anxiety lives, maybe because of past trauma, maybe because of current trauma, maybe because of just sort of how people have developed narrative scripts about their lives. And the inner critic is huge. Like the words that we say to ourselves,
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
like we can actually keep ourselves in that primitive limbic part of our brain. And we can't do cognitive behavioral therapy from the limbic center. We need to pull up out of the limbic center, pull into the prefrontal cortex, because CBT is a logical piece of work.
And you mentioned that, you can logically explain to a person why fear of flying doesn't make any sense, but if that's emotionally based,
yes,
the two different parts of the brain. So you're trying to use a left brain solution for a right brain problem.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And when we have, I work a lot with families whose children have experienced developmental trauma, and then I work with adults who have experienced developmental trauma. And what happens is the nervous system gets rewired so that we do live in the limbic center for more periods of time than we live in the logic center of our brain. So when we are good self-regulators, when we look at a whole bunch of life areas that help us calm our nervous systems, we have more access to the CBT. So I do cognitive behavioral therapy with people, but I often don't do that work until we're about 6 or 7 sessions into the process.
Totally, absolutely.
Because we want to get sleep online, for example. So I do a very thorough assessment with people before they even come to my office, because I want to get into the work right away. I don't want to sit there and say, tell me what you eat, tell me how you sleep, tell me, are you taking any supplements? Do you get out to exercise? I want that information before I meet with people. And we also do some assessment scales that help people with their anxiety levels and stuff like that. So we have that information before we ever meet with families and things like that. And we got to get the nutrition online. We have to get the sleep online. We also have to get the co-regulation of other members in the family online, because a child or an adolescent or even an adult, really, we co-regulate off the other brains in our environment because we are social creatures. We're hardwired for that. So if the adult in the environment is emotionally dysregulated because of their past trauma or because of their high level of stress in their world right now, we can't expect a child to learn how to be an emotional regulator based on dysregulation in their environment too. So our family work with Feeding Futures truly is a family work. So this is sort of how this would be different in a regular traditional counseling therapy. The child is emotionally dysregulated. The child is sort of labeled as the problem. The child goes to the therapist's office. The parents sit out in the waiting room or go to Tim Hortons while they're waiting, and there's no communication with the therapist and the family, very little anyways. And so we just think that ethically that might not be the best way to go, because we have to help the whole family heal and help the whole family. That's another part of the holistic approach, right? Is like this person lives in this home where there is other energies, and we can't expect people to be calm, focused, and alert so that they can learn and things like that if there's other levels of emotional dysregulation in the school setting, in the home, and things like that. So it's a more complicated process,
Sure.
I guess.
Great conversation, and I know really basically what you're saying is in that family thing, monkey see, monkey do, with a parent and a child. And Laurie talked about a holistic approach to healing, and I know there was a few other things you wanted to discuss with that.
Yes, we will talk specifically about the nutritional piece coming up, and that, of course, is just only a component of this, right? So one of the things that also is really important in a holistic management process is, are we building in mindfulness and meditation processes? Because years ago, we used to wonder why mindfulness and meditation was helpful for people, and now we have the ability to scan brains. You know, my sister, who is my business partner in Feeding Futures, she always says, I want a brain scanner for Christmas. But now we can scan people's brains, and we can actually see that when people start to do a mindfulness and meditation process, that it actually takes the heat out of the primitive fear centers of the brain and helps people integrate into a more logical place in the brain. And even some of the world leaders in trauma recovery would say, 50 15 or 20 years ago, I would have been prescribing mindfulness and meditation for people. That would have been career ending for me. And now we know that people who have been having significant problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, that we can get almost as good and sometimes better therapeutic outcomes when we've incorporated some of that mindfulness and meditation, yoga.
Talk about mindfulness just for a minute.
So
explain to listeners what you mean by mindfulness.
So mindfulness is a process of sort of detaching and creating some space between you and your thoughts. So
because that's where the magic happens.
That's where the magic happens. It's in that space. So I teach people all the time about, you are really not your thoughts. Your thoughts are the outcome of the thinking brain. So our brains are programmed to think a lot, and our brain is a survival organ, right? It has been around. If you think about, Gary, how long your genetic code has been on planet Earth, it's been a long time, right? A very, very long time.
I'm older than dirt.
Yes. Well, we're all stardust, aren't we? So, like, that primitive thinking organ thinks a lot. And if we hook on and believe every thought that we have in our heads, we're going to be in trouble. So our stomach is an organ. Its purpose is to digest food. Our heart is an organ, and its purpose is to pump blood through the system. So the purpose of the brain is to think. And it thinks usually in this process of, you better watch out for that thing. Don't forget about that bad thing that happened. Be prepared for this possible thing that might happen. And in the cognitive behavioral world, we train people to think about, well, how are you thinking about that situation? Are you forecasting? Are you catastrophizing? Are you black and white thinking? Because we categorize different thoughts.
Magnifying things.
All that stuff, right? And in the cognitive behavioral process, we try to help people identify thoughts and reframe the thought, shift the thought, right? But how can you change what you don't know? So the mindfulness practice helps you build that awareness muscle. Ooh, that's interesting. How am I thinking about that right now? And
before you assign a meaning to it.
Before you assign a meaning for it.
Right.
And what I have been starting to do with people over the last probably 5 or 6 years is to start practicing this process, which is a thought detachment process, which is, do we really have to categorize it? Do we really have to say that's catastrophe? Do we really have to go through that mental process of saying what it is?
So when you say catastrophe, you're talking about this is the worst, this is the end of the world. Those are types of things, because your brain doesn't know the difference, right?
No, that's right. So we can actually, our thoughts are very powerful, right? Like one of my most favorite meals to eat in the world is ravioli, mushroom ravioli. Let's just use that as an example, right? So if I sat here right now and started to think about all of the great things about mushroom ravioli, how it tastes, the mushrooms and the sauce and all of that stuff, eventually I would have a physical reaction to those thoughts,
absolutely.
right? I would start to salivate.
Because there is a connection, right?
Right, yeah.
Totally.
So our thoughts are super, super powerful. So when we've hooked on to catastrophizing thoughts, or you better watch out thoughts, we have physical reactions to those thoughts as well. And our heart starts to race, our thoughts start to race, our temperatures will change. The hearing, our decibels that we hear in actually adjusts and things like that. And we can put ourselves into a physiological fear state just with a thought. So can we actually start to build the awareness of, well, how am I thinking about this from a curious perspective, not from a judgmental perspective?
Right. Because the judgment is the problem.
That's right, yes. So in the traditional mindfulness world, that goes back a long time before Dr. Beck ever invented cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. This is like centuries old, right? With that non-judgmental, just curiousness, awareness of how I'm thinking, and then asking ourselves this question, is this thought process at this moment in this time helpful to me?
Right.
Because actually maybe a catastrophizing thought will be helpful to you in a certain situation. So we do this thing in our modern day North American brain where we judge thoughts as either good or bad, helpful or not.
Right.
And the human brain likes to do this thing of, I'm going to file that thought in the good file. Mm-hmm. I'll file that thought in the bad file. And that's where they shall always sit. When generally thoughts are just what they are. They're neutral things. In certain situations, they could be really helpful. In certain situations, they're not going to be helpful. So if it's a helpful thought, then go with it. If it's not a helpful thought and it's actually going to start to race your nervous system in this moment, in this time, because you're worried about something that might not ever even happen, then how do you do the thought detachment piece of it? And thought detachment is a practice that we just improve on as we continue to practice it. It's not like learning how to tie your shoes. When we were kids, our parents taught us how to tie our shoes, and we're normally not trying to deepen the practice of tying our shoes. It's had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
So from a practical standpoint, someone can cut you off in traffic.
Yeah.
And you can assign a meaning to that, or you can let it go.
You can practice letting it go. If we grew up in a different part of the world, the emotional regulation, the thought detachment, the mindfulness, the meditation, we probably might have even gone to mindful schools where we started our math class with the grounding activities to kind of lower people out of lower down the energy in the limbic center and pull us up to because you got to do math from your logic centers, right? So we're behind the times in North America. Yeah. We think that this mindfulness and meditation, the nutrition, getting out in nature is a thing that hippy dippy people do, and there's no statistical significance in the research and the science around why we need to start incorporating calming activities. Because when we're emotionally dysregulated, when our children are emotionally dysregulated, internally we say, "Will you just calm down?" And sometimes we say outside,
exactly.
"Will you just calm down?" And that's actually not a calming process. The calm down process is, can you be aware that I have this low grade percolating tension that is building? With the mindfulness and the meditation and the practicing of the non-judgment, we can be there with that emotionally dysregulated child and provide the compassion, the empathy, the care to take the heat out of their limbic center, so that they can be more calm, focused, and alert. And we can do that for ourselves, too. We have to be aware of the low percolating.
Laurie, I guess there's two other topics that we had talked about, and one is nutrition. And then I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, I've been like this so long. How do I manage my emotions when my life is on bust?
Yeah. So nutrition can play a role in the biological regulation. So when we are emotionally dysregulated, there's often and almost always biological dysregulation going on
cortisol
in the body.
And
exactly.
Stress hormones, sure.
So I say to people all the time, one of the best things that you can do to try to get the biological domain, your body regulated, is sleep, hydration, and nutrition. And one of the things about nutrition is that we want to try to balance your blood sugar. So when our blood sugar is dysregulated, and that can get dysregulated for a number of reasons. One of them is that we ate something that was really sugary, or it turns to sugar really fast. So
you get a spike in insulin.
So let's just say I had pancakes and syrup for breakfast, which lots of people do. My blood sugar is going to rise really fast, and then eventually it's going to drop.
Right.
When our blood sugar drops, there's a primitive biochemical process that in the background that operates that says, wow, if Laurie gets into trouble out there in the world and her blood sugar is low, she's not going to have a great chance for survival. So in the background, this survival process kicks into gear, and my cortisol and adrenaline just takes a little tiny bit of a spike when my blood sugar is dysregulated. And what happens when the cortisol and adrenaline spikes is I'm getting ready for fight or flight or flood from a neurological perspective, right? So when I'm in that physiological state, my muscles are tense, my heart rate is changing, all those physiological reactions that we get to that heightened cortisol and adrenaline. But emotionally speaking, this is what happens. If you think about your tolerance level for stress like a window, so some people have really big windows in their houses, some people have really narrow windows in their houses. So your emotional tolerance, your ability to deal with a life stressor will blow into your life because life is stressful. There's no way around that. So a stressor will blow into your life, and when the cortisol and adrenaline is spiked, your window of tolerance is really narrow. And also, cognitively speaking, our thought process go into things have to be that way or this way. There's no flexible cognitive scripts happening when cortisol and adrenaline goes high, because your survival depends on making a quick decision right here, right now. So if you're a child in a school setting and your cortisol and adrenaline is spiking because of a dysregulated blood sugar, you can't learn. You also are going to be really agitated to sounds, noises, somebody's tapping their finger on the desk next to you. So we see emotional flooding happening in adults and children all the time. And one of the best first questions from a curiosity perspective is, why here? Why now? Why is this behavior here now in this moment in time? And there's a checklist to go through of where the stressors are coming from when the emotional flooding is happening. And we have to go to the biological domain first to find out why that flooding is happening. And one of the first questions I always teach teachers and parents and even ourselves is, so this emotional flooding is happening. When did I eat last and what did I eat? So if you had syrup and pancakes for breakfast, there's a good chance that has something to do with it.
There's a reason, yeah.
Or did you stretch out your food too long? Or what you had was just super stimulating. So lots of people listening to this show today might think that breakfast is coffee on the run or a muffin and coffee. Mm-hmm. So you are not purposefully managing your blood sugar, which in turn purposefully manages your cortisol and adrenaline by the foods that you eat or you don't eat. So everybody has a different sweet spot too about when you need to eat. Personally speaking, I'm at a 3-hour limit. I'm planning what it is I'm going to eat because I can be pretty high strung too.
Sure.
We all can.
Sure.
And what will happen is you'll have this emotional flooding situation happen, or, sometimes words come out of your mouth and you're like, oh my God, I wish I could just pull them right back.
Yeah.
And quite often it's connected to dysregulated blood sugar. And then after we say those words out loud, or sometimes us as adults or children, adolescents, we're physically acting out our emotions. Then on top of that comes the layer of shame and self-criticism and sometimes punishment that comes from teachers or parents because you said or you did the thing that you did, which, by the way, in the scientific world, we know that over 20 years of really good literature research is showing us that punishment is not the way to change a behavior.
Absolutely not. Totally.
So what we really want to do is just get curious. We call them the C's in our Feeding Future. Let's get curious about why these behaviors happen. Then we have to get compassionate and connected and regulate the nervous system, and then we can have a conversation about why this behavior happened from a curious perspective, not necessarily from a shame and guilt perspective. Because shame and guilt in a little tiny nervous system, we can project that into anxiety, depression, addictions in the adult world, right?
I was in this grocery store last week, and it was a kid probably 10 or 11 years old, and he was carrying a couple of big 2-liter bottles of Pepsi, walking behind his mother or be in front of his mother, and he dropped one of them.
Yes.
And his mother turned to him and said, "You can't even carry a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi." And I'm thinking to myself, what is that doing for his self-esteem?
I think if we're going to be curious towards the child, we also have to be curious about the adult, right?
Absolutely.
So, where is the stress level coming from? Because really, if the human brain and the human nervous system was allowed to operate the way it wanted to optimally, we are hardwired for connection, compassion, empathy. Compassion and empathy and caring lives in the prefrontal cortex. Right. And so it goes offline when we're really high stressed. So when we see adults or kids operating in that lack of empathy, resistance, direction and correction as opposed to connection, what that means is that they're actually living in their limbic center at that moment in time. So I would overlay compassion on everybody in that situation to say, wow, everybody is really stressed here in this situation. And then try to teach the parents, I guess, a more compassionate, caring, connecting kind of way to help behavior.
What do you say to people who, I'm just so stressed I can't control my emotions, my life is out of control?
You are never too young or too old to learn how to self-regulate. And when you get moments of feeling, this is what calmness actually feels like, even just the tiniest snapshot of it, it's just as addictive as that overstimulating thing. So you sort of almost have to hold people and give them that experience of what a little slice of calmness actually feels like. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't happen because you wish it to happen. It happens because you do things like focus on your sleep. Let's just get breakfast happening. Let's plan for snacks and meals so that you don't get emotionally dysregulated at the checkout at Costco and then get mad at your kid or whatever. And so I counsel people into putting those health things in place that gives you a sense of a little bit more calm, and then the more of it you get, the more of it you want. But if we are loaded up on sugar, loaded up on caffeine, we're over super stimulated because of gaming devices, social media is we give our children a lot of flack because they're constantly addicted to their phones. I see adults in the same situation. You're constantly searching for what's going on Facebook. Our nervous systems are like a car. There's a gas pedal and a brake. And we get up in the morning in our North American world and we put our foot on the gas. We don't ever purposefully push the brakes.
Only when we're forced to.
Only when we're forced to, or we get so sick that the nervous system says, I am done with this, go, go, go. So I say to my clients all the time, like, there's an awful lot of go and not enough slow in your life. Like, I'm so happy to see, like, the UK right now has just given, clearance for doctors to actually prescribe nature therapy. To say your prescription is to go to a museum or to go to the art gallery and just... Yeah. So as a result of our fast-paced lives, we're losing out on connection and love and nature and good food and spending actual face-to-face time with people that we love, doing things that give us a case of the feels, I call it, just like being an awe. I went for a walk last Sunday just around a lake out in St. Philip's, and I said to my husband, like, I know I sound like a broken record, but this is amazing. There's no iPhone jack in the forest.
Yeah.
So, how do you incorporate slow rest, restore time? We've glorified busy in this world, and then we wonder why we have so much anxiety.
Yeah. Laurie, great conversation. And I know there's so many other things you'd like to talk about. We'd love to have you back at some point.
I would love to come back.
If someone wants to get in touch with you.
My email address is holistichealth@lauriepinhorn.com. It's LauriePinhorn.com.
That's it for this week. We'll talk again next week.